Hey everybody, this is Cadroll Hunter, and today we're going to be looking at some Canadian scrap silver, the equivalent of US junk or constitutional silver. Stay tuned. Hey everybody, this is James and you're watching my channel Cadroll Hunter, and I have a couple of bags of silver here and I'm so excited to get in this. I actually got these quite a long time ago and they have just been sitting here and pretty much almost burning a hole in my pocket. I'm really excited to get into these. I don't remember the exact face value count. We'll find that out as we look through them. But this is a bag of 50-cent pieces and quarters. And I can see some Queen Elizabeth, I can see some King George VI and King George V, so that's exciting. So we want to get into that. And over here, I have some $1 silver coins, and you can see there's some pretty awesome looking toners, and there's some old stuff in here too. So let's get in these. I'm gonna get this bag ready, and we'll do a little bit of a silver spill here so you can get that sound of silver. All right, we'll do a little bit of a dump here and we'll get that sound of silver that we love so much. Okay, well that is awesome, and you can see here we've got a pretty good assortment of stuff here. There's some ones that have a fair amount of mint luster still. I can see some there might even have some upgrades to my own book. We'll have to see. There's a pretty nice looking 1949. And what I'm going to do is separate all this out by denomination. In this bag, there's just two. It's just quarters and 50-cent pieces. I'll separate these out by portrait and by decade, and we'll get a sense of what we've got. We'll also try to figure out how much we've got in face value. So I started with the 50-cent pieces, and I got a big stack of King George VI. We can see that King George VI portrait there, and the coat of arms of Canada up to that point in time as well. And another stack here that are the laureate portrait, Queen Elizabeth II, that feature that same coat of arms. Now, the coat of arms was changed at one point in time. This is the modernized coat of arms, and here's a 1962, still featuring the laureate portrait, but an updated reverse. And I have a couple of commemorative 1967. This is the Centennial of Confederation. They've got some toning, and they feature a wolf howling on there. And this one, of course, is the Tiara portrait. This is an updated version of the Queen's portrait here. And I didn't get any of the regular ones with that portrait. I should say that's regular, meaning with the coat of arms. What I think we'll do is I'll spread these out by year. We're going to look and see if there are any varieties. There's specifically some varieties on these ones where the dates were hand punched on here, that last digit. And so there are lots of varieties, near one, far one, depending on how close or how far that last digit is to the rest of the date. We'll look at those and see if we've got any varieties here. We'll also see if I might upgrade any of these in my collection. And what I've got here is $15 face of 50-cent pieces. There's 30 of them here. So that's a pretty good haul of scrap silver or junk silver, if you will. So let's separate it out by date and see what we've got. Well, here they are all laid out by date, and I'm actually pretty surprised and pretty pleased. Check this out. We got a 1938, and I just didn't recall that that was in there. Now, my dealer lets me sort of sort through, and I just kind of grabbed some of the older stuff, not looking too closely at varieties or anything like that in the store. But I grabbed a 1938, and that's pretty low mint. That's minted at just 192,018. So 192,018 of these were made, and we've got one here. It's pretty slick. It's got some circulation wear for sure and some dirt and grime of the years on here, but it is a pretty old coin, and it is typically worth more than just the bullion value, particularly the 37, 38, 39, because they're all lower mintage. We've got a 1940, a 41, a few 42s, we've got a couple 44s, a 45. We got a good string of dates, I should say. There's a 46, a couple 49s, a couple of 50s, and there's an interesting variety in the 50s we can look at too, and a couple of 1951s, all in the King George VI. In terms of Queen Elizabeth, we've got 4 1953s here, and there are some varieties we can look for in here, so I'm excited to look through those. And then we got to go all the way to a couple 1956s, a few 1958s, and then you can see where the coat of arms has changed. There's a 62, a 63, a 64, and a couple of those commemoratives from 1967 with the wolf on it. So let's start back here and see what kinds of varieties we can find in the earlier King George VI. Well, the first one we can look for varieties on are the 1941 here, where there's a near date and a far date. And I've got my handy Charlton guide here, and you can see there's a picture on the left-hand side where the top one, the narrow date, or the close date or near one, it's called a bunch of different things. This one here is that one is tucked up pretty close to the 4, whereas the one below it is pretty spaced out. Now this just really has to do with how that last digit was punched onto the die by hand. So 194 was all on the die. They just added that last digit. So we can take a peek at this guy here. I've got it up on the scope here and taking a look. We can see there's a pretty good space here. This is a no-doubter. This is the wide date. So if you're collecting Canadian 50-cent pieces or half dollars, you'll want to look at this, whether it's scrap silver or collections, because there are different varieties and collectors are interested in some of these interesting variations between coins. So I've got them in my binder separated by wide date or narrow date or close one or near one or far one or whatever you want to call it. And it's just really neat to see what we've got. And because we've got more than one example here for some of these, hopefully we'll find varieties within here. That would be really cool. So I've got my 3 1942s all here, and I've kind of stacked them up. It kind of gets a little difficult because the higher they get, the fuzzier they get. But these all kind of look like they're about the same. That 2 and the 4 here, the spacing doesn't seem to be too different across these coins. So I think these are all the wide date or the far 2. The near 2 or the narrow date, I think this 2 would be very close to the tail of the 4. So we didn't get more than one variety in here, but we got a few coins to add to our silver stack. Now here are the 1944s, and you can see that these are actually both a little bit different. This one on the bottom has more of a space between the 4s than up at the top. And we might be tempted to call this the near 4. However, in the Charlton guide, they're pretty clear that for this to be the narrow date or the near 4, these two 4s actually need to be touching. So you can find ones where they actually touch and these don't. But because they would have used a number of working dies and these were all hand punched and they all be a little bit different, the near and wide or narrow and wide really basically just determine sort of a grouping of dies and where they relatively are. So these would both be the wide date. And you can see the 4 here is just sort of touching the end of the hoof of this. I believe this is a unicorn because that's, like we have unicorns everywhere in Canada. And over here, it's a little more set into the hoof. But anyway, these are both what would be considered the wide date or far 4. So here's a 1945, and this one is really interesting because there are a couple of other varieties. So here's the Charlton guide, and you have to love all these great pictures that make it really easy to identify what you've got. So I'd recommend getting the Charlton guide. There are other online resources that you can use as well, like Coins in Canada website, and they all show pictures like this, which are really helpful. But you'll see that there's a narrow date pointed 5 and a wide date pointed 5 and also a blunt 5. And if you look in the price guide, the blunt 5 is the one that carries more of a premium, even in the lower grades. Even in a VF20, it's worth considerably more than melt and considerably more than the other varieties. What's really cool is that we looked at our 1945 and it is the blunt 5. So look at the base of that 5. It definitely comes to a blunt end. If we go back to our Charlton guide, you can see that pointed 5 is very definitely coming to a very thin point as opposed to what we've got. So we got the harder to find 1945. It's the wide date. The 4 and the 5 are a little further apart, but it is more importantly the Blunt 5, which is really, really cool. And I'm not even sure if I've got this in my collection. Well, I do now for sure, but I'm not sure if I did. So I'm going to check in if I need to add it to my album. That's a cool pickup. Okay, here's the 1946. This one is the narrow date. You can see the 6 is close to the 4, but it's easier to tell because the wide date, this 6 is really up into the hoof here. It's just sort of barely touching. In the 1946, there's actually a very well-known variety here, and it's called the hoof through 6. And it's actually like a die crack that basically makes it appear as though this hoof is extending through the 6 and down below. And there's a good picture of it here in the Charlton guide. You can see what that looks like. There's a die crack and some other elements there within the 6. We didn't find that. I haven't found that yet, but that's when you always want to look for. And you just never know if you buy junk silver how closely the silver dealer is looking at these coins, particularly if they're in lower grades, like a lot of these are. They might not be looking too closely, but you might be able to snag then a gem. Now, we didn't get any 1947s, which is unfortunate because there are some valuable varieties we can find in the 1947s. Now, like most other or all other Canadian denominations, 1947s were minted in 1948. They didn't have the dies ready yet to change the motto on the reverse side, so the obverse side, where it says Et Ind Imp or and Emperor of India. And so they minted more 1947s with a little maple leaf next to the date to indicate it was minted in 1948. The 47s, particularly the ones you're looking for, are the maple leaf, the 47 maple leaf. There's an example on the right-hand side of the screen there. And you can see that there's also a curved 7, which you see on the bottom, and the straight 7, which is here. And if you've got the 47 maple leaf curved 7, even in a fine 12, it's worth over $2,000. And if you can get one in mint state, that's super fantastic. So instead, we're just going to have to look at the other coins that we got. We didn't get any of those. Here's our 1949s, and it looks like we might have both varieties here. I can see a fair bit more space here on this 9. And the 9 is pretty much touching the hoof here, whereas on this one, it's quite a bit closer to the 4. And it is, well, there's a little bit of a gap between the 9 and the hoof. So I think we've got the wide date and the narrow date. That's really cool. Now the 1950, and we got 2 of them here so we can look, has a few different varieties. It's not about the 0 being close to the 5 or not. It's really about the design, and I think how polished the dies were. You can see here's one with a full design. With looking in the 0, you can see 4 lines there. And then what they call half design, where they're a little harder to see, and then no design. And the most valuable one is the no design. So we've got a couple here, and this one that I'm showing you right now very definitely has some design elements in the 0 there and around it. So this isn't the no design. This might be the half design or the full design. It's so hard to tell because this coin's not in great shape. I'm going to say this might be half design. Let me know what you think in the comments if you think I'm wrong. This next one I'm going to slide up, though, is a little harder to tell. Check this one out. Now, it is in more circulated condition, and it's got some toning and some tarnishing. And it's really hard to tell if there's anything at all in there. I can't really see, but I think what we've got, if I'm looking at this right, is probably the half design. And why I think that is because there's a pretty distinctive line up here, and I can see some markings down here, even despite the surface of the coin being hard to look at. And if I look back over here at the Charlton guide, you'll see that on the half design, that line is pretty easy to see, whereas on the right-hand side, it's just a tiny little line over the 0, or over the 5, I should say. And so I think what we've got, it's a little bit more distinguishable than that. So I don't think we've got the no design. And again, wouldn't really matter in this condition. In this condition, it's pretty rough. You can see there's not a lot of detail. Well, there's some hair detail, actually. Maybe it's not as bad as I thought. But it's certainly not in mint state. And in a mint state, if you found a no design, that might be worth several $1,000s. And so that would be a pretty good find. I think this is just going to be one of the more common varieties, but it's always really cool to check because you never know. Here are our 1951s. I think one might be the narrow and one might be the wide, though the space actually looks fairly similar. But one of the markers in the Charlton Guide is the position of the one in terms of where it sits at the top of the 5. And in the guide, it shows the wide date having a higher 1. And if you look over here, this one, the point here is in the middle of this part of the 5, whereas up here, it's at the top. And the difference is negligible, perhaps, but again, we're looking for varieties for fun, and that's pretty cool. Moving on to the laureate portraits, we've got 4 1953s here, which means that we've got some varieties to look for because not only is there a shoulder fold and no shoulder fold variety to look for, now there's no near or wide or narrow dates to look for. They weren't hand punching the dates anymore, but there's a no shoulder fold and a shoulder fold. We can look for that. And in the no shoulder fold variety, there's a small date and a large date. And just looking at it, it looks like we have at least 1 and possibly 2 of the small dates and a couple large dates. We'll take a peek. All right, here's our first one. The shoulder fold is referring to this little mark on the bottom. Basically, it's like a strap on a gown. And so this is the shoulder fold. This is slightly harder to get a hold of than the no shoulder fold. And in circulated condition, you might not see anything here. And what we can always do is look up at the motto, and the I in Dei Gratia is flared in the no shoulder fold and pretty subdued in the shoulder fold. Hopefully we've got some varieties here to look at so we can compare these. I'll just grab another one. I'm going to put it right up here next to it. And we are going to. So let's just slide that up a little bit, and you can compare those eyes. You can see the one at the top is pretty blunt at the top. This one is flared out significantly more. So the one on the bottom is the no shoulder fold. If we actually look at the shoulder, again, it's hard to tell on here, but it does not have a mark. It almost looks like there is, but I think it's just damage on the coin. Now what we want to look at are the dates to see what we've got going on here. And this one here is the no shoulder fold small date. This is the more common, the small date. Basically, the 9 just comes out to a point here. The large date, you'll see the 9 and the 5 come down significantly higher. All of the shoulder fold are large dates, so we should be able to see a difference here. And you can see, yeah, very much so, that 9 is bigger and longer, and that 5 is bigger and longer. So the one we want to find, the hardest one to get, is the no shoulder fold large date. So we'll see. All right, next up we can see this is a no shoulder fold. We're going to flip it over and see the date. And this is the small date once again. So we got one more shot at it. I'm going to put that under there and see that that is also the no shoulder fold. Again, very flared eye. We'll flip it over. We'll take a look at the date here. And we got the large date. That's awesome. And this coin is actually in pretty good shape. So this one here is the 1953 no shoulder fold large date. If this was an MS60, it would be over $100. And I don't think it's an MS60. You can see there's some circulation wear on it. But still, I think it's probably worth more than melt, which is all I paid for it. So that's a good little pickup and a variety to add to my collection. In the rest of the ones we have here, there are no real varieties to speak of. The 58s, there is one with a little dot or like a little die chip under the A in Canada. We don't have that on any of these, and nothing to speak of on the 62, 63, or 64, and no varieties really to speak of on the 50 cent from 1967 either. All of these, I should have mentioned, are 80% silver, including the centennial commemoratives. Some of the denominations, like the quarters and the dimes, some were minted at 80% and some were minted at 50%. But in the half dollars, they were all 80% silver. So I compared all of these finds to my album, and I actually added a couple of things. That 1945 with the blunt 5, that one is an addition to my collection. And the other one, of course, is that 1953 with the no shoulder fold large date. So 2 added to my collection just from a scrap or junk silver purchase, which is really cool. It's a very cost-effective way to and a fun way to look for varieties and to fill some holes in your collection. It would be very hard for me to buy some of those in the higher grades because they're pretty expensive, but buying them at just the silver bullion value is pretty awesome. I realize that I've taken a long time on these 50-cent pieces. There's just so much to look for. So what I think I'm going to do is come back for another video with the quarters and the dollars that we've got here. I realize the dollars actually made it a separate purchase, but we've taken some time to look at these 50-cent pieces. I really hope you've enjoyed that look at some older Canadian silver and some of the varieties that you can find in there. If you did, please give the video a thumbs up. If you haven't already subscribed to my channel, Capital Hunter, please consider doing that. I'd really appreciate it. You'll be alerted when my new videos are coming out, and I have new videos coming out all the time. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you again next time. And stay tuned for part 2 of this scrap silver purchase.